Good afternoon, welcome back ladies, gents and Pikachus to another Without Lies Islam Dies, where we analyse and break down the Quran of Allah, the Quran of the Muslims, and also Reliance of the Traveller, because a lot of the time they'll say, oh, the Quran's just, we don't really do that anymore, and they lie. But what they cannot lie about is their current law code, which, as I will show you, actually has a sign-off page from every moral and legal authority in all of the main Muslim countries, like this. In the name of Allah most merciful and compassionate, witnessed by the needy of Allah's most high Yasin Arafah. Now, this guy is the Sheikh Abd al-Wakil Durabi, and he is the main moral authority in Iran and Syria. The next page we have the warrant of Sheikh Nun Ali Salman, who is the main moral and Islamic law guy, who is the moral authority in Jordan. Then we have the International Institute of Islamic Thought, North America. Right, so it's not just in Arab countries, it's in America, it's in Europe, it's in Britain. And as we go through, we have all the different ones. So, the Reliance of the Traveller. Reliance of the Traveller! That's what we're going to be going through today. We're going to go through point by point the first two main laws, because this is the things that they are actually following here. They're not following our law, as we went through in yesterday's video. They're applying this to us. So we're subject to this through Muslims being here. Even though they have no jurisdiction, no legal authority here in our law, in their heads, Allah, through this book, gives them moral and legal authority over us, and we're going to read about why that is and the specific details of how it affects our lives here today. So, let's get started. This will not be an hour long like yesterday's will, so we're going to get through this quite quickly. A1.1 is split up into 6 or 7 subpoints, and it's called, in the classical manual of Islamic law, that's what the whole book is described as, the first law 1 is, what is considered lawfully good and lawfully bad? This is telling you, O Muslim and everyone else, whatever you think is good or bad is wrong. This is what is good or bad. Okay? 1.1. All Muslims must agree that the source of Islamic law and of what is good and bad is Allah, this document, and never argue against it. That's point 1. So we know straight away our law is not good. It's ignored. Morality is not good. It's ignored unless it comes from the Islamic law of Allah as written in the Quran, which is recorded in here. And you must never argue against it, or you are committing a crime and other Muslims will punish you. We'll get to that. So we move on. That's point 1.1. Point 1.2 says, the primary argument against this, even though the end of 1.1 says you must never argue it, so that's the bit talking to Muslims, saying if you're a Muslim, you never argue against this, otherwise you'll be treated like a Jew or a Christian. You know, off with your head, you're dead, your family get tortured. But point 1.2 says the primary argument of the kufir, non-Muslims, everyone else, because they are applying this to us, the primary argument we will use, which they're not allowed to use and will never use, that they're now going to deal with, is, this is our argument in their eyes, intelligent minds using reason can conclude matters of law and morals without Allah or his Quran. End quote. That's what they think we say, which we do say, that you don't need Allah and the Quran to know what good and bad and morality and law should be. In these cases, O Muslim following this, you will apply Law 1.3 and 1.4 to them in any such case. Alright, so before we go to point 1.3 and 1.4, just think about it. This is their law code, which they export along with people, called Reliance of the Traveller. This is the seal of Allah. This says Allah is the greatest. Right? So the whole book is a rewritten Quran bullet point law code, which is current. They are here applying it to us over the top of our law. They're ignoring our law because we don't know what good and bad and moral means, because we don't use this. They're never allowed to argue with it and must admit, not even consider that it might be wrong. They have to accept that this book, as well as the Quran, this book, because it's written from the Quran, is also written by Allah. This is Allah's law to Muslims, and they cannot ever argue with it. But we are going to argue with it. They know that. That's why 1.2 says, and I quote, the primary argument of the kufir, us, will be, intelligent minds using reason can conclude on matters of law and morals without Allah or his Quran. In these cases, you will apply law 1.3 and 1.4 to them in any such case. So now, even though we're not even at the end of the first law, Muslims are being expressly commanded that they cannot argue with this. This is from Allah, so they have to do it, even though they're in our country with our own laws and we don't do this, in any such case. Keep that in mind. 1.3. The mind of man, the mind of reason, is unable to know or even understand matters of morality and law without Allah's Quran, Hadith, and the recitation of the works of Muhammad. That's the whole 1.3. So when we argue with anything Islamic, if we say we don't want burqas, if we say we don't want to do halal, if we say we don't want to pray 5 times a day, if we say we want a birthday cake or musical instruments, or we only want one wife, or we don't want to go to mosque, or we want borders, or we want religious freedom, or if we want free speech, any of these things, what they have to say to us in our own country to enforce this is, that is bad and immoral, Mr. Kufir, and the reason is because your mind, though it may be reasonable, though you may be intelligent, is unable to know or even understand matters of morality and law. You don't know what good and bad really is because you do not have Allah's Quran, Hadith, or recitations of the works of Muhammad. In other words, you are not attending mosque and you don't read and follow the Quran. Are you keeping up with how bad this immediately got? Considering we're on 1.3, we're 3 sentences into the first law, and we already know all other laws go in the trash no matter where you are in the world. If you are a Muslim, you enforce these laws on others. You are not allowed to argue with it, and the reason is because this directly comes from Allah through his imams to you, O Muslim. And you, O Muslim, because you are a Muslim following the teachings of Allah, are a superiority over all kufir, even in their own country. And the first thing they're going to say is, we don't need your Quran. We have morality. We have good values. We know good and bad. We have our own law, and it works quite well. And they have to say to you, no, you don't have reason. You don't have good and bad. You do not have morality. What you have is immoral and bad and stupid and evil. And the reason is because you don't have Allah's Quran and you're not going to the mosque. You're not a Muslim is why. That's the first thing. It's kind of crazy, but this is what they believe. Then we go on to 1.4, because remember he said you will apply 1.3 and 1.4 to them, us, in any case, in any location, if they don't want to follow the Quran and Allah, if they're kufir. 1.4. Therefore, good in law always means that which is defined through the life of Muhammad, recorded in the Quran. So there you go. Everything good in the entire world is what is commanded by Allah in his Quran as being good. So if something new is invented, it's bad. If you thought of an idea, it's bad. If you do something outside of what the Quran tells you to do, it's bad. And you should not do it. And the reason you should not do it is because Muslims don't want you doing it, and they have supererogatory power over you. That's what it's called. Supererogatory power means even though you don't agree and it's your country, Allah is giving these Muslims superior control of you, because actually the world belongs to Allah. As we went through yesterday, that's what they believe. The entire world is the belonging of Allah. And wouldn't you just know, he only wants to give it to his obedient, faithful Muslims, which is not you and I. And it never will be. So that's what 1.4 says. Therefore, good in law, as in Islamic law, in this one which they're going to apply to us, means anything in the Quran that Allah has said is good, or anything Muhammad did in his life that's good. And bad means, in law, always what contradicts or opposes the writings of the Quran. And then it goes further and says, in conclusion of point 1.4, good and bad for the kufir has no bearing on what a man reasons in his mind, and his mind has no bearing on morality. Let's break that down. So morality, good and bad, is no longer a democracy, and laws can no longer evolve with the times. In fact, man has no control over his own laws now, because Allah has expressly denied you permission to ever change or make laws, to ever think for yourself in terms of, is this a good idea or not? And you are not allowed to say what is good or bad, because the Quran already tells you. And if you do not follow that, then you are an apostate, which if you're a kafir, that's okay because you're in ignorance. But if you're a Muslim, you are not allowed to do. And you'll be heavily punished by the way of doing that. So that means Muslims are following this already. And they all know this, even though they deny it to us with the permissible lies that we went through. Rule number 8. But if you're a kufir, which means you're ignorant, stupid, you don't know good and bad, you have no knowledge of the Quran, then it is up to the Muslim to teach you. Once you're taught, you're then responsible, and you will be punished as if you were a Muslim, is what that means. That's 1.1 to 1.4. We've literally gone through the first paragraph, and we've already condemned the entire country, who are not Muslims, to consistently being punished for not being Muslims. That's effectively what this is. That includes you, by the way, and your family. So, good or bad is something the Quran tells us. Morality is something that the Quran tells us. And everything outside of the Quran is therefore bad. And you'll be punished for having done it. 1.5. It only goes downhill from here. So, prepare yourself, take a deep breath. 1.5. Where a man has been invited, either by the Prophet, an imam, or by recitation of the Quran by another Muslim, he is then morally obligated to do or refrain from doing those things commanded by Allah in accordance with the Quran. People who live in isolation from society and are not yet obligated through their ignorance shall be priority to send a messenger of Islam to. And once this extended obligation through the messenger arriving happens, that man is immediately responsible for what he does past that point in accordance with this. You get me? So even if you live on your own out in the middle of nowhere and you're not harming anyone and no one harms you, you're a complete hermit, it is up to the Muslim to seek you out and give you the Mohammed law, give you the Quranic law as a priority. And once he arrives and just speaks to you, He doesn't have to finish the whole recitation of the Quran. He just has to say to you, it's up to you, Mr. Hermit, to learn and follow this. And if you don't, you are now obligated to do it. And if you don't, you'll be punished. So not only are Muslims relying upon this law as the reliance of the traveller, which is what their law is called, they're coming here to enforce this upon us. That's the only reason they're here. Even though they lie about it, give us all these other excuses, their one main goal is the minor jihad, setting this up, and then the major jihad, getting us to conform and surrender to this. And what that looks like is our standard for good and bad and moral and immoral goes out of the window and is now considered sinful, evil and corrupt. And Quranic morality, good or bad, defined by the Prophet Muhammad and Allah in the Quran, that is what is going to replace our law here if these guys get their own way. And if they don't do that, they are breaking the law and are criminals immediately, and other Muslims will punish them and their family, as we went through yesterday. And you don't get away with it just by hiding. You can't just bugger off into the hills as a hermit like some stupid uni kids was saying a few weeks ago. You don't get to run away from convert or die. Now that Muslims are here, a priority of theirs, which they cannot argue or refuse to do, is to seek out you wherever you go and put the obligation of Quranic law upon you, at which point you will be punished with it if you don't surrender to it. That's 1.5. So I think that's pretty much it for law number 1. So the conclusion of law 1 is anyone in any place at any time will end up being responsible and obligated by Quran law, whether they are a Muslim or not. They're going to have to try and be one, even if they don't believe in Allah. And the responsibility for making you into a Muslim, even if you're not a real one, is on other current Muslims. And they must agree with this as law and never argue it, because it comes from Allah. So says the Imams, so says Reliance of the Traveller, which is their law. So just think about that. When they sign their immigration forms to come here, supposing that they did that and they have a passport, they're here legally, I can tell you, on the immigration form, it has several questions which are answered in good faith. And one of the questions says, are you committed to spreading evil terrorist ideologies? Or do you have any notion that you will never follow our common natural law? Something to that effect. And they have to put, yes, I'm going to follow the law. If they put, no, I'm not going to follow the law, that application gets denied. So if they were telling the truth on those forms, and they were also Muslims, they would have to put, no, I'm not going to follow your law because of this. And I can't argue with it. But since they know they're not going to get in, if they tell the truth like that, guess what they use? Permissible lies, which is rule number 8. We'll get to that in a future episode, go through it in full. But we went through it yesterday in some detail, and we know lying, although it says at the beginning, is the biggest sin a Muslim can ever do. Never lie. Allah hates liars, except when he obligates you to lie in defense of his Quranic law and his Islam. Which is why this exists. This is the obligation he's talking about there, and it doesn't just apply to Muslims. When Muslims are near you, it applies to you. And they will be the arbiters who make sure you do it with Sharia, which is enforcement of violence. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 1 in Islam is everyone else in the whole country has to eventually become Quranic, if not Muslim. And there'll be punishments for you and the Muslims if this does not happen, because the religion cannot be completed, the paradise cannot be attained, and the jihad will not be perfected. That's rule 1. But sure, nice friendly Muslims. Go ahead, be friends with them. See what happens to you. So we move on to rule number 2. Rule number 2 says, Quranic truth is superior over all laws and the devotions of men. Now, Quranic truth means what's written in the Quran. We know that. Truth to us means something which is defined as being true, which is not false, right? So that's a logical statement. Truth and false is logic statements that we use. A binary, something's either true or it's not, it's false. Not so in Quran law. In Quran law, what is true is something which is said in the Quran by Muhammad or by Allah. And therefore what is false is everything else, including our law, our statements of good or bad morality, our opinions, our unique identities, our freedom of speech and our democracy, even our nation's identity and flag. These are things which are false to them and bad and evil and should be removed by way of this. 2.1. The knowledgeable and moral slaves of Allah will have power over those who do not know. Who do not know the Quran. Allah raises those above who know the Quran over the ignorant unknowers and the unbelievers. That's point 2.1. So let's break it down. This is very interesting to me, because I'm sure Muslims absolutely will deny this if you ask them, but they are not allowed to argue with it. So they must therefore be using permissible lies, which they also deny. So we can catch these guys out with this and yesterday's video. Although I wouldn't advise it, because then they will be busted and they'll just be openly aggressive to you. So the trick is, know the truth in your head, but don't go whacking everyone on the head with it. Just lay low, learn as much as you can, gather resources and make connections with other people who know the truth. And as time progresses, our position will be strengthened against this evil, and we will be able to bust them in public with their lies. So, 2.1. Knowledgeable and moral slaves of Allah. What does this mean? Well, we know slaves of Allah is everybody. Knowledgeable and moral slaves of Allah means, knowledgeable means you know the Quran, moral means you're obedient to Allah. So a knowledgeable and moral slave of Allah means a mosque-going Muslim who is aware of his Quranic obligations. So it doesn't mean a knowledgeable person or a moral person like we would say. For me, probably for you as well, knowledgeable means well-educated, scholarly, reads lots of books, knows lots of things, likes to be intelligent in his pursuits. And moral means has a very clear stance on good and bad and tends to stay on the good wherever possible, avoids bad. That's knowledgeable and moral in the West, not so in Islam and not in this document. So knowledgeable and moral means the slave of Allah who knows the Quran and follows it because he is obedient in his obligations to Allah's cause of the jihad, this. And those people will have power over, so there's no might have or they can get to, people who are Muslims, who are obedient to Allah, will have power over those who do not know. Like we don't. We don't know Allah because we don't believe in him, and we are not obligated through his Quran because we are disobedient kufir. So this says Muslims have power of attorney in law over us all of the time. And the reason is, and it says this too, Allah raises those who know the Quran up above the ignorant unknowers and the unbelievers. So that's what we are. We're ignorant unknowers. Or if we know but we don't believe it, we're ignorant unbelievers. So your level of knowledge and study, your scholarship or your intelligence means absolutely nothing to the Muslim. Because you have no knowledge, you are deaf, dumb and blind. Like Allah says in the Quran, if you don't believe in him and obey him, then you are the worst of creatures. And you have no value. That's what this is saying. You have no value, Mr. Westerner. And if you do not do what you're told by the knowledgeable and moral slaves of Allah, which I may remind you are the guys who signed this book off with their little permission statements, all the authority imams, the moral and legal authorities of Islam countries, including North America and Europe. They list those as Islamic countries in here, by the way. 1 second. Well, would you just Adam and Eve it? Guess who was ringing on my doorbell? Friendly local Muslims doing a little bit of dawah. They had heard that I was in need of guidance and wisdom because I had some misconceptions about the truth of Islam. So they came to my door to discuss it with me. Guess what I said? I said, I'm a Talmudic Jew and I work for Mossad, and they scarpered. I'm obviously not, but you know, thought it'd be funny. So anyway, let's carry on with the important work of the actual truth of Islam, which those guys would like to cover. So where were we? Knowledgeable and moral slaves of Allah, which are the guys who sign off everything in their religion. The authority in their law is the imams, who are the knowledgeable and moral slaves of Islam, who write this book. And they also include America and Europe to be Islamic countries. They probably include Britain and Europe, although it's not expressly listed. And what happens is Allah raises up those guys and their Muslims over us because, and I quote, we are ignorant unknowers, or if we know and we don't believe, we're ignorant unbelievers. So what is the conditions that we are put under, and what are the conditions that separate us from them when we are ignorant unknowers and unbelievers? Because remember, they have power of attorney over us, and they're supposed to be teaching us and guiding us. We're like stupid little kids, and they're the great leaders with all the moral knowledge, you know, the Quranic wisdom, the truth. 2.2. Allah wishes well his obedient slaves, but pours scornful curses upon all others, who we shall call the least of men. That is their law. This is point 2.2 of their physical law. Can you imagine if we had a law like that? We have equality, we have freedom of speech, we have rights. We have common law for people who, you know, don't know the law. We have all kinds of checks and balances to make sure this doesn't happen. This is what we had thousands of years ago, and we grew out of it. So let's go through it. 2.2. Because of the fact that we're ignorant unknowers and unbelievers, and they're the astute teachers of wisdom, you know, that we're supposed to be beholden to, there's different conditions for us. And the conditions are set by Allah, which is why Allah wishes are the first two words. Allah wishes well his obedient slaves. So that means everything that the obedient slaves think up of doing, as long as it's in accordance with the Quran, he wishes them well. They should go and do that. You know, they should follow the Quran despite it being against local laws. But he pours scornful curses upon all others, which is us, who they shall call the least of men. Now, pursuant to yesterday's video, how did I know that they were going to make noise? That guy knew I was making a video. So anyway, back on topic. The least of men. Why would they call us the least of men? Well, because if you have a hierarchy, remember yesterday we were saying about the fifth point of the gifts of Allah is socialism, even though they deny it with permissible lies. Socialism is a hierarchy of worth. So men are not equal in socialism, and as we see here in Islam, men are not equal. And whatever the hierarchy is, however many levels to it there are, people who are not Muslims are the least of men. So you're right at the bottom if you're not a Muslim. So you've got Muslim men who are a bit thick, Muslim men who are a bit thick and don't follow the Quran properly, Muslim men who are just faking it, who aren't really Muslims at all, they're just going along with it. Then you have women, and children, you know, daughters. Then you have disobedient daughters right at the bottom, along with donkeys and horses and animals and dogs. Then below that, we live. That's their law. That's law 2.2, right? Which, as we went through, they are obligated to enforce upon us, whether we like it or not, and it supersedes our law. And if they don't do that, they are off your head you're dead, punished along with their family, because it is an obligation. It's not a choice. There's no reward for doing it. There is a punishment for not doing it, because it is the cause of Allah, the jihad. So that's 2.2. 2.3, and what we're going to find as we go through this is this will not sink in straight away. This is so stupid and evil. This is so absolutely unbelievable and corrupt. When I first read it to you, it will glaze you over. You won't really, it won't sink in how bad this is. But I will ask you at the end of this video to play it again from the beginning after you've had a cup of tea and a little think, and then really think practically. This is really happening now. And there's going to be more of it as time goes on if we just allow for it and we don't fight against it. How would you feel if this was applied to you directly now, today? If these Muslims came into your house, took away everything that's not allowed, that's bad in terms of not being in the Quran, so all your music, all your computer games, all your videos, DVDs, movies, your TVs, some of your clothes, some of your food, some of the stuff in your garden, perhaps your wife's clothing, perhaps your pet dog, all that stuff goes. You're not allowed any of that. You'll be punished for having had it. And the replacement is a black cloth gown and a pair of trainers and a prayer mat. And if you don't use that and teach it to your children, you are obligated to do that, and you'll be punished for not doing it, because you are the least of men until you start doing it. That's their law in this country, North America, Europe and Britain, through the reliance of the traveller. You know, they've travelled here to do this. We'll carry on. 2.3. He who calls others to guidance, which is this, you know, guidance means reading this and following it as a demonstration to others and then saying to them, you should be doing this. You're bad because you don't do this. You should be punished because you don't do this. That is guidance. He who calls others to guidance shall be they who receive rewards in the paradise. So it assumes that the paradise is a legally bound place. Right? So in their law, paradise is important. And that's why ignorant unbelievers and unknowers should be subject to this guidance, because they don't believe in the paradise. So that means they're never going to get there. So that means you, O Muslim, have to enforce this on them. Why is that? Well, it goes on. He who calls others away from this guidance shall incur the curses and the sins of the ones who they wish to mislead by it. Now, we'll go through that because this is very subtly written for a Muslim. And I feel like this has been translated very, very kindly. Let's break down the logic of what they're actually saying there and how flipping evil this is. He who calls others away from this guidance, so anyone like me who says, hang on a minute, this is completely opposed to our law in this country, we shouldn't do this, that's me who's pulling you away from that guidance. They shall incur the curses and the sins of the ones who they wish to mislead by it. So if a Muslim is telling me I have to do this, and I say, no flipping way, mate, this is evil and bad and illegal, and that Muslim gets annoyed and shoots me dead with a crossbow, I incur the sin of murder, even though I'm dead, through this, because I was trying to mislead the Muslim by demonstrating that I'm not a slave of Allah. I have my own free will, which is not allowed. So, rule number 2, I still get surprised by this. Rule number 2, Quranic truth is superior over laws and the devotions of men, is basically so far saying, not only does everyone have to follow this and not their own law, and their own law is bad, the obligation is on Muslims to make us do it. And if we argue and they kill us, we incur the crime of murder, not them. And they get to keep all our stuff, as we know from yesterday, which is the goal of taking our resources and money and our country and giving it back to Allah's mosques, because it is the bounty of East and West, which was the gift of Allah only to his obedient Muslims. We must have stole it. That's what they feel like. Our country, our stuff, my shirt that I'm wearing now, I must have stole it off a Muslim because Allah made it only for them. Which is why this. So we're getting near the end now. 10 minutes, it's been a quick one. 2.4, 2.5 and 2.6 all get written into one big law, right? Which is all encompassing and concludes point 1 and 2. So that's where we're going to end. So let's go. 2.4 to 2.6. This world, this is in a quote by the way from Allah, this world and all that lives upon it are accursed forever, accepting remembrance of Allah and those whom Allah loves for his learning of this wisdom. Teaching dawah for a brief spell is greater than prayer or fasting in this endeavour. So that's the first bit. Let's go through that. This world and all that lives upon it are accursed forever, right? So that means the default state of everybody, everything, and indeed the world is accursed. Everything that is in creation, physically or non-physically, outside of Allah himself, and also Muhammad, because Muhammad's made of pieces of Allah, is sinful, accursed, condemned. Right? That's what it says. Accepting, the only things that are not condemned, sinful and accursed and evil, are remembrance of Allah. So when you have thoughts about Allah, that's not condemned, even though you are, and the rest of your thoughts and your being and all your stuff and your family are condemned in your country. While you're thinking of Allah, you're not. So this is like the worst form of brainwashing. What this is effectively saying is, while you are thinking of not Allah, you are burning in hell. You're condemning yourself to hell by not thinking of Allah constantly. As soon as your entire thought process is of Allah, whether you're worrying about being, beheaded or whatever it is, if you're thinking about this and Allah, while that's happening, you are not condemned, and Allah will love you more. And then the second bit is, those whom Allah loves for his learning of this wisdom. So if you are not thinking of Allah because you're reading this so that you can think of Allah afterwards, that is also not condemned. So the only two things in the world outside of fighting the minor jihad is that is not condemned is doing this, reading about this, learning this, and enforcing this on the dirty, unbelieving Kufiri, us. That is the law of the Nation of Islam, which is what they're trying to build here and in America and across the world. So we go on to the next sentence. Teaching dawah for a brief spell is greater than prayer or fasting in this endeavour. Why would they say that? Why is that thrown in there? Well, let's go through it. Teaching dawah. What is teaching dawah? Dawah is the endeavour of teaching Quranic law to the unbelievers. Not to other Muslims. Other Muslims don't need dawah because they believe it. They read the Quran, they listen to their imam, their husbands or whatever, and they just go along with it because they're not allowed to question or argue. But we, as ignorant, unknowing unbelievers, we will question it, even though we're not allowed to. So if they do dawah on us, we are then obligated to do the law, remember, because we're ignorant now because we don't know it. Once the messenger of Islam is sent to us and speaks, from that point we are obligated to do it, and that means if a Muslim does dawah on you, whether you hear the whole thing or understand it doesn't matter. Whether you agree with it does not matter. Once he starts speaking to you in dawah, you become personally responsible for upholding the obligations of Quranic law, and that means you'll be punished if you fuck it up in their law, which is here. Let's go through that again. Teaching dawah for a brief spell is greater than prayer and fasting. So what that means is, if they forget to do a prayer, or if they didn't do correct fasting over Ramadan, they're in sin. They're going to be in big trouble for that. So what do they do to get away from that sin? How do they get forgiveness from Allah for not praying or fasting properly? Well, they do a brief spell of dawah. And we know dawah points are cumulative, so they can do the dawah first in order to not do the fasting. And the greatest question of why dawah has shot up in popularity all over YouTube is now answered in full. It's not only an obligation for them to do dawah on us, they can actually get out of praying and fasting by doing dawah. And Allah will love them, so their thoughts will no longer accurse them to being condemned. But it's definitely not a brainwashing evil cult, is what they will tell you. The permissible lie is religion of peace. It's equal to everything else. They definitely don't want to kill you. The jihad's only a defensive thing, even though they're in your country, making sure you're obligated to do this through the dawah and punishing you if you don't. I don't buy it. Do you? And we're not even... We're at the middle point of Law 2. This is like the first page. We're not even at the first page. So, the second bit. Teaching the lesser ignorant men, which is us in the terms of Allah, in every place is a communal obligation upon every Muslim for every day before the jihad can be perfected. So it's limited. So this whole thing is in service of perfecting the jihad in our country. That's when it ends. When they perfect the jihad, this goes in the bin. They won't need it anymore, because by that point there will only be Muslims left. And everyone will be worshipping only Allah and doing the Quran. The lesser ignorant men, that's us. We're lesser because we don't have that power of attorney over ourselves, because Muslims are now here. And they're going to be doing dawah, like we heard. It's the most important thing for them. Once they start speaking the dawah, we become responsible, and that's why we're lesser, because we should know better at this point, because Muslims are already here. And we know teaching dawah for a brief spell is greater than anything for them, so they actually get, like, the reward. The only thing they're going to get rewarded for is preaching dawah to us non-believers. Then the last bit. I'll break this down into a short sentence because it's a very long, drawn-out, difficult to understand thing in the Arabic, so I will just give you the easy English version. Dawah equals supererogatory to other rituals. That means it's super important more than anything else, and it can be in replacement to if you do a lot of it. So dawah is more important and can replace all other rituals of worship if you have agreement from your imam, because Allah will have said so. Your imam will let you know if Allah allows you to do that. So this whole thing, point number 2, Quranic truth is superior over all laws and devotions of other men, is all in service of the imam. It's not even Allah. The imam's the guy who controls this. So you'll be reporting back to your imam in the mosque, reporting against your Westerners that you're fucking with, that you're trying to rob and control, and you're trying to surrender them to Allah. When you're successful, or even if you're not successful, if you're just seen to be doing it, your imam will reward you with greater access to resources in the community, more money, better wives, and will forgive your sins. So it's not like in Christianity where only God can forgive your sins. In Islam, sins can be cancelled out by doing a brief spell of dawah, whether it's successful or not. And that's the reason they do it. So I think that's pretty much it for point 1 and 2. Now that's a lot to go through. Now it's only taken 20 minutes, much shorter video today. But I think we can all see the importance now of learning about the contents of this book, in addition to the Quran of the Muslims, which this is taken from. That's the kind of romantic version. Because it's no longer a case of a crazy foreign religion which we can just avoid. We cannot avoid this. They have in law that they must impress it upon us as a priority, and once they have started doing that, we are responsible and obligated under that law and shall be punished if we argue with them. Remember, if they tell you to do something under moral law of the Quran and you refuse and they kill you, even though in our law that makes you a criminal, in their law not killing you for that makes them a criminal. And as we went through yesterday, they will use greed, indifference, fear, tactics and socialism to bend the legal system against you and lie and deny the fact that they killed you to get away with it. And that is why, in summary of this whole piece, We know this happens, and everybody knows because it's in the news virtually every day. Muslims are never punished for their crimes, and the media try and blame other people. Because greed, indifference, fear is being used. And the reason we know it is because it is their law, the reliance of the traveller. We should do everything we can to learn about it first. Don't get too excited and start thinking we need to go on protest marches now, because we are outflanked unless we know the ins and outs of this and we understand what we went through in the last video about the Islamic brainwashing strategy. So it's up to you, my friend, to learn this and that other video from yesterday. Really revise this stuff, make sure you know it in crystal clear clarity. And when enough of us do that, we can band together and we can bring British law back into the main for this country, and we can kick this shit out of the door. And that's exactly what I hope we do. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless you all, and I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Bye now. So, after hearing that, and knowing that it is 100% true, you can check it for yourself. Like it or not, ladies and gents and Pikachus, the jihad is here, it is active, and it's up to us to put a stop to it. That's all for now. God bless you all, have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.